I'll invite Sue Lees from the Zonta Club of Melbourne on Yarra to introduce our first speaker today, who is Amy Steele. Over to you, Sue.
Thank you. So I'm really delighted to be able to introduce Amy to Zonta, says now. So Amy's actually one of my former students, and all the teachers here will know how special it is and how there's nothing better than seeing one of your students grow up to take on the world and for the better. So thank you, Amy. I'm very, very proud of you. So now, years after leaving school, Amy's now the head of office and global subject lead for climate risk and adaptation at Engie Impact. So that's basically a French company. Amy is, she's immensely passionate about climate change and reducing emissions, protecting the health of people and ecosystems, and she'll tell you a lot more about that today. She loves places like coral reefs, which is a very keen swimmer. She swims every day, regardless of the weather. And she loves snow-covered mountains. So that comes from your cross-country ski team days. So Amy is actually a top athlete. Amy did play for Australia for netball for a number of years, and she has become involved in volunteer advocacy work for groups like Sports Environment Alliance, and I think she's been quite instrumental in setting up some of these. Front runners and EcoAthletes. Very excitingly, Amy's in the current cohort to go on the Homeward Bound program on a trip to Antarctica, where they take STEMM female leaders in 2024-25. I think that's a fantastic achievement. She is also not only a great sports person, but also very academic. Starting with a commerce degree, she then went on to a master's degree with the, I'm probably going to say this wrong, the Wajari Noongar people in southwestern Australia to explore the interrelationship between fire management techniques, catastrophic fire risk, and the changing climate. She is also now doing a PhD, and I hope that you'll touch a bit on that too, Amy. And Amy is actually building a house in an eco-village near Margaret River, so she's going to tell us a bit about that today too. And she's going to tell us about her personal climate journey, because it is quite profound, and sometimes experiences make a huge difference in your life. So Amy, over to you, and thank you so much for doing this today.
Oh, thanks, Sue. That was a lovely introduction. And for those of you that don't know, I was on the ski team with Sue and her kids in high school, so we spent a lot of winters up the snow together. And there's some great memories. So it's lovely that we're still in touch. I've got a little presentation just to show some photos, so I might just bring that one up on the screen, which I might just need to be made a presenter to do so. But while that's, maybe Carol, if you can help me out with that one. While I'm, here we go, do.
She should be there.
Okay, share screen. So I'll just pop that one into, how's that coming through? Is that a full screen now for everyone?
Yep, that's perfect.
Beautiful. So I was thinking today to talk about kind of 4 parts of my climate journey. And the first one is about my why and sort of finding my purpose. And so that will kind of touch on how I went from netball to kind of a bit of a chaotic career, but to where I am now. And then I'll talk about my career now with climate action, decarbonisation, climate risk, and what's entailed there. I'll talk about my personal efforts in the eco-village and some of the stories there. And then I'll finish with a bit about my research and my PhD, which I love to talk about. So you can save some time for that. But yeah, am, super happy for anyone to jump in and kind of discuss any bits if there was an appropriate time or to put into the chat. And yeah, Carol and Sue, if you want to stop me at any point and, elaborate on something, obviously feel free to.
If you can put any comments in the chat, then we can pick them up from there. Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, fantastic. So I will get started. So the first thing was just about finding my why, which, as Sue mentioned, netball was my kind of main purpose and driver for the majority of my young adult life. So I was in my first professional netball team at the age of just before I turned 16, just before my 16th birthday. And so even in high school and through uni, that was my whole, that was kind of what got, had to get me out of bed at 5:30 a.m. and get to training. So I had, a lot of my life and efforts were concentrated around netball, and it was great in a lot of ways, gave me a lot of privilege, gave me a lot of life experiences, but it also meant a lot of sacrifices. And I think, when sports people talk about those sacrifices, usually you think about the sacrifices in terms of time, and you think about it like, I couldn't go to my friend's party because I had, to do this or that for training. But the sacrifice for me, as I reflect on it now, was not just time, but it was also a lot of the connection that I had time to form with the natural environment and country. Because as a kid, a lot of my holidays, I had, was lucky enough to just be outdoors, and we'd go see our family in New Zealand. And that was a huge part of my life growing up, was just being able to have those relationships with country and the natural environment, and be able to witness that and be a part of it. But when your time and energy is just so focused and concentrated on training and exercise and diet and then trying to get everything else in, that's something that you do lose, just that ability to really connect and observe and witness and be present. So I think that is a sacrifice that I was making during that time. And I think that's a big component of my story now is what, and I'll get to that in a second, but what's really come back into my life afterwards. So basically for me, so I was playing netball, and after high school, I got into the AIS, and we were there to train for the World Youth Cup. And fortunately, I made the team for the World Youth Cup, and we won that in the Cook Islands, which was a really, that was certainly a netball career highlight. Winning that tournament, we were up by, if you've ever watched netball, we were up by 15 goals in the first quarter to New Zealand, which was just huge. And that sort of margin had never happened before. So that was really cool. And I went on to keep playing netball, including for Australia for a number of years after that. But it all changed when I was playing, and you can see in the photo here, that's my dress for the Adelaide Thunderbirds. And I'd left the Melbourne Vixens and gone to play in Adelaide for a little bit, just for something different. And when I came back to Victoria to play in Shepparton for a pre-season tournament, which was in March of 2016, I suffered a heat stroke. And it was, at the time, this is all information that's come to me afterwards, but I've since found out that the impacts I felt were nearly fatal. And it has left me with lifelong health consequences where I cannot play sport anymore. So not even at a social level can I participate in any sort of, exercise or activity. So that was it for me. That was the last game of netball I was ever able to play. And just like that, overnight, I went from being a professional athlete that formed a huge part of my identity since I was, 16 in high school, where that's really a huge time for forming one's identity and purpose in life, to just that being something I was just unable to even contemplate doing. And it was a weird journey for me at that time, because there wasn't doctors able to say, oh, hey, that's it for netball, it's gone. They were sort of thinking, okay, you might get better in a month, we're not quite sure, maybe 2 months, maybe, and then time went on, and that sort of hope just was still really there and present. And I thought I'll be back for during the season, or it's just pre-season, I'll be back kind of halfway through. And then every week just went on, and then I realized, okay, I'm not going to be back this season. Maybe, but it will definitely be next season. And then time just went on, and that didn't happen, and I was still really sick. And life for me at that time was not easy either. I really struggled to get out of bed a lot of days. I needed help with food. I was living out of home in Adelaide by myself, so I had to move back to live with my parents and have them to care for me, just to help me eat. And around about 20 hours of the day I would be in bed, and the other 4 hours I was either lying on the couch watching, what show was I watching? That British one, trying to remember where they're all in the castle. Anyway, do you know?
Downton
Abbey. Yes, Downton Abbey was my thing that got me through those dark days. Either watching that on the couch, or I would get my dad to set up like a rug on the lawn and just lie on the lawn outside. So it was not a lot of physical activity, but that time that I could go out there and rest on the lawn, it was, and this is many, many months of this state, it did, things just started to click over time, to the point where I woke up one day and just everything was crystal clear that my purpose in life had to be to stop this from happening to other people. And that, what had happened to me as a result of extreme heat and playing sport was something that I should have been resilient to as an elite athlete. And I had just broken the team's fitness record. So I, was at peak fitness. Was at peak health. It shouldn't have happened to me. And then it really triggered me to think, well, look at all these people who've got a lot more vulnerability in their life. I've got the privilege of having an air conditioner, all of these things that would have otherwise led to resilience in such an event. And yet, if this is still my life experience, then what else is happening around the world? So it was a big time of opening my eyes. And I guess, you think back to that period, and I described it as dark days just before, but it seems now to have been a bit of a gift of realization to see and, wake up to what's going on and really drive me towards the purpose that now fills my life, which is climate action, and looking at trying to not just reduce emissions as fast as we can, but try to protect ecosystems and just build awareness about what we can do, especially to the humans in face with extreme heat and in the sporting arena. So that's a little bit of an overview. And then in terms of the academics and where I sort of went, it does jump around a lot, which I think is interesting. And I've shared this with some high school students before, when I've given a little bit of a talk about my career journey. And I feel like that's sometimes people get scared by not knowing what their path is. But for me, I sort of started in aerospace engineering, and then I had to give that up when I moved to the AIS because they wouldn't let me study off campus. And then I thought I'll come back and I'll finish aerospace engineering when I finish netball, but obviously that didn't pan out. So I took a Bachelor of Commerce. That was the only one I could do online at the time. And then I accidentally ended up majoring in accounting just because the subjects that were online at the right time were that topic. And I didn't, because I was so focused on netball, I didn't really click that meant that I had to be an accountant. So I finished with this degree and I'm playing netball. So I'm like, oh, better look for a job in accounting then. And I ended up getting a job at Deloitte. But luckily, where the netball stadium was located in Adelaide, I don't know if anyone's calling in from Adelaide, but it's right up the road from SA Power Network. So my job that I ended up doing, just because of the location, I had to train twice a day, work thought, oh, let's be handy and let's get her right next to the netball courts. So then that led me into energy sector financial modelling for SA Power Network, just by default of it being the closest one. And from there, that was a really good foundation for now my career in decarbonisation, because I'd had that really strong foundation in energy systems as well as the finance side. And so, yeah, it was all just a bit of a kind of confluence of errors, but in a nice way. I think we're all sort of on that roundabout journey. So when I did have that kind of moment of, okay, this is what I've got to do, Deloitte it was also a really great time in the landscape because the TCFD was in its sort of foundational stage, which is it's called Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And it was basically this global reporting mechanism that was being established for companies to eventually mandatorily disclose what climate risk and decarbonisation meant for them and what they were doing on climate change. And so when I was inquiring to say, can I, move towards this subject still in Deloitte with my energy sector background, there was that opportunity that came. So it was a little bit of right time, right place. And when I landed there, I thought, okay, let's get some more education behind this. So I did my master's in environment and climate science at Curtin. And I'll touch on that in a second, but that was a huge journey as well in itself, because part of that I did it one subject that I thought, oh, this would be kind of cool, but I've already sort of felt like I had a good foundation in Indigenous knowledge and science, and the topic was something of the nature of Aboriginal sustainability or Indigenous sustainability. And in undertaking that subject, it was just such a huge wake-up call at how little I knew. And, I felt like I was going in there with a good foundation. And, I just felt like so shocked that I could have got to, a fairly educated state of my life and just known so little about that part of Australia and the real wealth of knowledge that resides in Indigenous sustainability. So that was what's led me to now kind of to do my master's research piece with Wajari people on climate and fire, and now continue working with the Wajari and our people on climate and adaptation decisions. So we'll get to that in a sec. But through that journey, so after I got my master's and had worked at Deloitte for about 8 years, maybe 9 years, it was time for something different for me. So I was headhunted for the current job that I'm in now at Engie Impact. And to me, that opportunity was quite exciting because they had a bunch of projects, like in WA at the moment, they've got the world's first green ammonia plant that's in commissioning. So I felt like, okay, this is a good opportunity to really see, not just be talking about it and reading research, but to really see this technology coming along and see how we can further that. What are the barriers that we're seeing commercially to get those up and running? Because as much as we all want to pursue a sustainable life, without that technology being available, it does limit us in some of our decisions. So that was my inspiration there. But I'll pause there in case there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going to talk about some of my career.
Where's your green ammonia project being undertaken?
That is a great question, Carol. It is on Murrujuga, so the Burrup Peninsula, and it is in connection with Yarra. And for me, it's a hot topic because I did have a lot of internal, is this the right thing to do? Its location is adjacent to where the Scarborough offshore gas field is, and Murrujuga is the home to over 1 million petroglyphs in rock art. It's the most culturally significant place in the whole of Australia from an Indigenous history point of view and heritage. And including in that rock art is the earliest known depiction of a humanoid figure, dated about 40,000 years old. So that's, in some dreaming, that's where actually Aboriginal dreaming begins and then spreads across the country. So it's hugely culturally significant. And there's some conflicting science that shows how the burning of natural gas is deteriorating rock art. Arguably, some people say that that they've got studies to show that burning of natural gas does not decay rock art, but those people have also been paid by Yarra and others. So the conflict is quite evident that there is new research that's supposed to be, objective, that will now be trying to close those gaps from a multi-year perspective to give us some concrete evidence. But anyway, the location of the plant, Yarra was already there. So the only way for Engie to jump in and do the green ammonia project was to co-locate with them. And so that, you know, there is that internal conflict there. It's like, is this the right thing to do? You know, from a naive perspective, producing green ammonia seems like a good thing, but to co-locate it in that industrial hub that's already causing so much cultural damage is that conflict. And I think that was a big wake up for me to see that a lot of these renewable energy projects, they do actually have those tensions of cultural and social and environmental harm that may come about even when we are pursuing something that seems good on the cover, which is renewable energy. So just being aware of that and trying to reduce those risks at every stage, I think was a good learning to come for me out of that process. But I'll flick ahead to my next slide, which is just talking about basically decarbonisation as a concept and climate risk. So there's really two things. Can you guys see all the faces? Should I get rid of those so you can see the side, or have you got a full screen?
It's fine here. Yep.
Okay, cool. So there are two main parts of my career at the moment. One is decarbonisation, so it's trying to work with large bits of infrastructure, mostly mining in WA. They're our biggest emissions, you know, Rio and BHP combined held prior to their recent carve-outs, each 1% of the world's emissions, so combined 2% of global emissions across scope 1, 2 and 3. So for me, that felt like a big area where I could spend a bit of energy but have a big return on investment for that if we could really get those companies to decarbonise. On the page here, there's just a bit of a indication of where emissions are projected to be heading and then where they need to be to stay on the 1.5 degree pathway, just so that you can get a bit of, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with this. So this is global emissions as well, keep in mind. So you can see that the intersect at zero occurs after 2050. And the reason for that is because developing nations have got a little bit of buffer. So when we talk about 1.5, net zero has to be before 2050 for developed economies. So that's just that little bit of nuance there. But effectively, you know, my work there is in trying to accelerate this decarbonisation, so help to get mining and other heavy emitters to stitch together the energy system that is resilient to a changing climate that can also function at net zero. So looking at the technologies that can be deployed through the system to get you there. But my global expertise has just come out of all the concoction of weird study that I've done. So I find myself in a position of knowing about climate risk as well as decarbonisation energy systems, and then the finance side. So it all kind of, I suppose, has concocted me into a subject matter expert of climate resilient and zero carbon energy systems. And so where that intersection lies, so the economics of building something that can withstand the changing climate as opposed to just a zero carbon system. And that is currently a major gap in global planning and also literature. Even the IPCC say that the chronic effects of climate change on renewable energy systems is not a well-researched field of science, and it's a gap in the literature at the moment. So, you know, especially in WA, it is my main study area, but I can think the eastern states as well. When we see things like extreme heat, it's not commonly known that maybe it is that solar derates and loses its performance at 25 degrees, but actually wind turbines as well, they take a derating, and that begins at 37.5 degrees generally, depending on the turbine. But in some cases at 42.5 degrees, the entire wind turbine is an outage. So, you know, you're thinking about the resilience of these systems in extreme heat weather. And from a solar panel perspective, derating at 25 degrees, it's only minimal. But once it hits 45 degrees, it basically falls off a cliff. And at 50 degrees, most panels produce almost zero output. So, you know, you're thinking, okay, the Pilbara, beautiful for solar resource, but there's a lot of days already that are occurring at the 50-degree mark. And so my main focus is on building the resilience of those systems to some of these extremes, because things like resilience of humans in extreme heat is going to be highly compromised if we have no power. So trying to connect all these threads together to help, bring down not just the emission pathway, but also the consequence of some of the extremes that we inevitably face already today and growing in the future. So that's a little bit about my career, but I don't know if we had any questions there, or if I jump on to next topic.
Yeah, I think keep jumping on, Amy, it'd be good.
So just the other thing was just my kind of personal efforts, and I thought, cool story, I'd talk to Sue about it as well, building a house in the eco village. So I found it very hard to live sustainably as I would like in Perth. And then I found this eco village, and it was all kind of like packaged up, ready to go. They'd done the research about what, constituted a sustainable home and the systems that you would need, and water and waste and energy and building materials. And it was all kind of off the shelf, ready to go. So I thought, this is great. Saves me a lot of time having to do all that research and homework. So you can see there that this is just my house that's getting built. It's taken a really long time, but that's a COVID side note and unrelated to the building, itself. But you can see the bottom story there, hempcrete has been used, and hemp's a beautiful sustainable material. It's carbon negative, can be grown for a perennial crop, so you don't lose the roots, can stay in, and it's beautiful for thermal efficiency of the home. It breathes, it's got antibacterial properties, so it's a really nice and sustainable building material, and hopefully that'll be a lovely house when it's done eventually. And so then the other part of that story in terms of personal journey that I wanted to share was just about swimming and what that's meant for me. So swimming was my first exercise I was able to do post heat stroke, and at the first time I got into the ocean, I felt like a bit, because I've lost it, all this ability to exercise, and so I didn't feel like it was going to be something that I'd be able to do. I just kind of hopped in, and then there was actually a 90-year-old who was swimming out across the bay, and I thought, geez, if he's able to do it, maybe I should just give it a go. Like, I'll just kind of see how far I get. And so I started, and I kind of just got to one buoy and then came back, and that was enough for me. Went on board a pair of flippers, as I was encouraged from one of my friends, and gave it a go in flippers, and I got quite a ways out and a ways back without overheating, just because the ocean's obviously cooling me down at that point. And then after that, I just was in love. I just found something I could do. I could move my body again. I didn't have to worry about getting too hot. It was, just such a gift. And I think the other real gift that gave me was that connection again with every day looking at the seafloor, seeing how much it moved, how much it changed. Even just now, I've been away from Margaret River for over a month, and the seafloor is barely recognisable. All the seagrass have flowered, the kelp is come in. It's totally different colour under there, and also some of these days in winter, the waves just get you and knock you around, and you're just a little just a little tiny. I don't know what the right word is, but it's really humbling, because you just can feel yourself in the ocean as almost powerless, and that the dominance and the greatness and the vastness of the ocean compared to just one person, it's a beautiful, humbling experience. And I felt like that for me just was a really good balance between really having that ambition and drive to try and solve the climate crisis, but not get caught up within that, to just be kind of brought down every day, to know that humility and where you kind of sit. So I feel like it's a really nice concoction of, like, obviously I want to use my skills and gifts towards doing something constructive and trying to help reduce climate change, but at the same time, it's not all about me. I'm just one little tiny piece. So that was that part of the story. And then the last thing I was going to talk about is just the PhD. And so, as I mentioned before, managing climate threats to healthy country in the research archipelago. That's my topic, but you can see in the photo here, this is Figure of Eight Island. And the research archipelago is off the coast of Esperance or Wurundjeri country. And so that's kind of halfway, I don't know about halfway, but somewhere between Perth and Adelaide. If you get to Adelaide, you've gone too far. But they've got a bunch of granite outcrops in these islands. There's about 150 granite headland islands that formed about 13,000 years ago after the last glacial maximum. So they were once connected to the headland. And the cool thing about that is there's a lot of cultural artifacts on these islands from when 13,000 years ago, when there was land bridges to be able to access them. But they're also home to the most globally significant breeding colonies of seabirds. And there's a species called flesh-footed shearwater, which is, it's known as yowli in Noongar language. And it's a really significant bird also in Tasmania, which I know there's a few people who are calling in from Tasmania. So the mutton bird is the other term that gets used. And as you can see in this photo, there was a fire on the island. And because of climate change in the region, lightning storm, and therefore the potential for lightning ignited wildfire is accelerating. And what happens during a wildfire is you can see like a lot of this country just goes up and gets scorched. There's not a lot of moisture on these islands that stops it. And because it is that heathland, it does spread and accelerate quite quickly because of the high connectivity of vegetation. And what that means for the seabird burrows is they lose the vegetation cover and the soil stability drops out. So there's a collapse in some of the burrows. And we have found on visiting the islands after a burn that there's actually adult birds who could have otherwise flown away who are just scorched carcasses on the island. So there's something in there, maybe protective mechanisms of their young, or whether they're just not evolved to understand fire as a threat, or whether the asphyxiation from the smoke gets them, too quick for them to react and flee. So it's a huge risk to the population of seabirds, because when you lose adult breeding pairs, it's not just their nesting failure, it's, the potential for many future generations that's lost. So this is a main topic to explore. And the Wurundjeri people are really keen to understand, could we reintroduce cultural burns on the islands as a protective mechanism just to create some buffers around the burrows? And if lightning does occur on the island somewhere, can we just stop that from becoming a huge threat to just the burrow colony? And then in doing so, thinking about all the other avenues that are there on the islands. And one example is sea lions. Actually, quite often will breed and use these islands as a refuge. And does the cultural burn impact them as well? So we need to be thinking about not just one species, but all the species who use the islands, and how we can, manage human intervention in a way that's actually adding to healthy country and not getting one species to thrive above any others. So that it's a lot of pieces to play with, but certainly a really beautiful learning journey for me so far, and something that, the research world talks about co-design quite a lot, and how, we need to design, academia has to work with traditional owners to design research projects that are culturally informed and connected. But this one certainly came from that place. Like after I'd done my master's with Wurundjeri people, they were really keen to say, here's what we want to do next. We want to explore this. How can you help us explore this? So that research scoping kind of began at that point in time, and we've just kind of kept the dialogue to get to where we are now. So I do feel confident that's not just me imposing my views onto Wurundjeri people, that it's very much, this is what we want to look at, and what are some of the tools that can help us get there. So yeah, I did have another slide just to kind of talk about that stuff, but I think I've covered most of those topics there about lightning ignited wildfire, how that's killing them. And certainly the lightning storm frequency, we've got the data sets there showing that is increasing significantly, in fact 100 times. So it's gone from 40 strikes per month to 4,000. And not all of those hit ground. Some of them are cloud to cloud, but just that sheer volume of increased strikes just increases the ignition risk monumentally. So it is important. And then the trend in Esperance is that drier climate, drier vegetation and soils. And I think we're all feeling that at the moment with the ENSO and IOD combination, really dry, hot summer coming up. And, what do we do about it? So that's really the question that's on the last part of the slide, which is like, what do we do about it? Cultural management. How do we intervene? How do we intervene in a way that's going to be productive and not destructive towards healthy country? So yeah, that was kind of my my dialogue. But if there's any questions, we can keep going.
Well, Amy, I think for me, a couple of things have really stood out from your talk. The fact about the wind turbines and the solar panels not operating at those higher temperatures, that was a real thump between the eyes for me. Because you think about in the Pilbara where they need the air conditioning the most, at the time they'll need it the most, they won't have the power. It's that just beggars belief. And when you talked about going from 40 lightning strikes to 4,000 strikes a month, the quantification is just surreal. That's just amazing. So thank you. Sue, did you want to thank Amy formally was there any other questions from anybody else? Just check the lines.
Can I just ask a question? Can you just tell me what the DBCA and ETNTAC are?
Oh yes, sorry. This was actually, I just took this slide from a previous deck, so I didn't elaborate on the acronyms. But NSNAC is Esperance Daly-Rack Native Title Aboriginal Corporation, which they're the Wurundjeri representative from an Aboriginal perspective. And DBCA is the department in Western Australia that's responsible for natural park management, stands for Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions.
Right, thank you.
No worries. Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration happening between these different parties in different states of Australia, and Victoria and Tasmania are formalising some agreements and pathways, but it's still very hard because you'd be familiar with like post-colonisation trauma and that trust of institutions, and then also some of the way that the institutions approach the Aboriginal corporations is like, oh, can you come and, just grab some ranges and then let's do a cultural burn. And the idea is that having Aboriginal people on a burn becomes cultural.
Yeah.
But it's, unless the elder is telling us what to do and how to do it, it's not a cultural burn.
Yeah. Very, very good point.
Amy?
Yeah.
I'm just interested, that graph you had with the trending line and where we should be. Obviously, that's for the global consensus, is it? And not just Australia's. But I was thinking with these wars going on, with all the emissions that's happening, with all the burning and everything else, it won't be helping. And I don't know, it just seems pretty daunting to try and reach those targets when all this is happening in the environment,
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Dawn, and I think as soon as we start to think about it as a global kind of contribution, then you do feel a bit helpless and a bit like, well, what can I really do? But again, that just brings me back to my position in the ocean and think, look, I am just this tiny little thing in this whole expanse of the world. So the best we can do is do our bit and help other people to do their bit, and just try and move that along, move that dialogue along. And if we do that, then I guess we've got nothing really to look back on at the end of life and be like, well, I should have, tried a bit harder. Just give it our best is really all I can hold on to from a hope perspective.
Yeah, I think individually everyone's trying to do their personal bit towards, reducing emissions, etc., and preserving like water and all this sort of thing. But there's so much in the world that people, because of circumstances or whatever, they can't contribute really much. But I think Australia's got a huge potential with all our scientists and everybody else, and some of the research that they're doing, and that we've got a huge contribution to make as a country.
And I
So,
think there are also bits of like hope that emerge after tragedy. So, for example, after the 2019-2020 bushfire season, which was horrific, and I've not got the number in front of me on how many millions of tons of CO2 got released in that burn, but actually 95% was absorbed back into the ocean through a phytoplankton bloom event that was spurred by the iron fertilization of the Southern Ocean. So the ocean evened it out, and then it became a primary production cycle of, tiny phytoplankton, zooplankton, bigger fish, whales. And so that population kind of leveled out those emissions through that cycle pretty quickly, it was really, for me, that was really hopeful to see that it's not necessarily like some of these events can occur naturally, but it will also even out in the ledger naturally. Not to say that humans haven't got a role, but it's not entirely a hopeless battle.
no, I actually watched some of the World Ocean Day information they had last year, and it was amazing to see there, which I didn't know about, was the seagrasses and how that absorbs like trees, some of the baddies, and people don't realise that the ocean plays a huge role.
So Amy,
sorry, can I just hi Amy, it's Andrew here. You said something about iron causing the phytoplankton bloom. What's that all about?
Yeah, so in the Southern Ocean, it's nutrient deficient, and it's a lot of oceans, when they receive iron through either one of the mechanisms in the Northern Hemisphere is from dust off the Sahara Desert. So dust storms can contribute, but then also fire is a great way of depositing iron from land into the ocean. And that's why I love seabirds as well, because actually they deposit ocean nutrients onto the land to give the nutrients back to land to help fertilize. But yeah, wildfire is a great way of shedding nutrients off the land into the atmosphere that then travel through the southwesterly wind bracket that ended up putting the bushfire off the coast of Argentina, like the convective plume of smoke that had occurred in the dust particles that arose from the fire, traveled all the way to Argentina, which is where they were deposited and created a phytoplankton bloom because of that iron that was added. It's a nutrient deficient in the Southern Ocean. So it really spurred primary production there. And there's, I guess, satellite imagery has got some good to it as well. It was able to show, over time that occurring about 3 months after.
So does that mean we should be sort of getting some dust from the Pilbara and spreading it around the oceans, or what can we do with this?
Well, this is another interesting thing. So the combination of iron and manganese can also bypass the primary production circle of dissolved organic carbon to deposited seafloor organic carbon stored matter. So I don't know if you've sort of seen, there's some research out lately about how much carbon is on the seafloor, deep sea carbon stores. So there is a mechanism through which iron plus manganese reacts in a way that doesn't fertilize primary production and takes it straight to the seafloor. So there's, I guess what I'm saying is it's just that little bit to be cautious, because what you can avoid there is the phytoplankton, zooplankton bloom, and take it straight to the floor where there's no basically food production happening.
Complex, yeah.
Yeah. And humans have got a great knack for stuffing things up. So I think it's like, be cautious before you go in.
Yeah, we've had a lot of practice doing that. Yes.
So Amy, on that note, I want to say thank you. You are really inspiring. You are definitely at the forefront of climate action and climate thinking, and it's so good to see the work you're doing, not only professionally in your position, but also academically with your work with Indigenous Australians. So I think we're all very happy to know that there are people like you working on these problems. So thanks a lot.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, everyone. Stop the...
and you're welcome. Yeah. Oh, Amy, you're welcome to stay if you want, or leave, whichever you want to do.
I might, Chris. I've got some PhD stuff I've got to tackle. So
No
it was
worries.
good to meet everyone.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Thanks, Amy. Much appreciated.